Welcome to the 2012 Fusion Podcast, presented to you by the Oregon Ministry Network. Fusion took place November 8th through 10th at People's Church in Salem. The following workshop, entitled Families in Crisis, was brought to us by Jennifer Cooper.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jennifer Cooper. I have a lot of roles. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a private practice in Hermiston, Oregon, and I teach psychology at the community college there. I am also a pastor's wife. My husband is the children's pastor at Hermiston First. And I am the teen ministry specialist for the Oregon Ministry Network. So I wear a lot of different hats, work with a lot of different kinds of people. And so I had a PowerPoint for you today, but it's I'm not getting it to pull up. So I'm just going to go off of my outline and talk to you. And then if you want to see the slides, we'll put them up. I can put them up on the Facebook page or something. So the topic today is families in crisis, and there's lots of different ways that can be crisis. Crisis is defined, and you can see it on your sheet there, as a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. So it's a time when a difficult or important decision has to be made. It's a crisis point. And families come to crises for lots of different reasons. It could be a problem with the parents, a problem with the children, a problem outside the family that is coming in. And so you see families in crisis for lots of different reasons. If they're coming to you, feel lucky, because lots of times families will keep their crisis internal. They won't go outside. They won't ask for help. So I have some things listed for things that trigger a crisis. What are some of the things that you see as crises in the families that you work with? Abuse, divorce. Okay. Death. Okay. More and more financial issues, substance use in the parent or in the child, right? Lots of different things. As broad as families are, is as broad as the crisis is. And so, we can't talk specifically about each one, obviously, and so what I tried to do is put together a framework for steps that you can follow when you have a family that's in a crisis, how you can walk through those steps to help them. Okay, and so this is more of a broad approach that you can take. And it didn't come up on the outline, but there are different types of symptoms that happen when people are in a crisis. There's physical symptoms, things like stomach aches, headaches, maybe even itchy skin and rashes. Crisis affects people in many different ways. Okay? There are emotional aspects. People can be depressed, they can become angry, irritated, agitated. They go through the gamut, a roller coaster of emotions. And then, of course, you have cognitive issues. People who are in crises don't tend to think clearly. Okay? And so what makes logical sense to you as an outsider might not make logical sense to them. And so oftentimes when you're dealing with them, you have to break things down because they're not in a place that they can do that. Okay? Under where it says steps to intervention, these are the steps that we're going to go through. Assess the situation, form a partnership, assess resources, problem solve and set limits, implement the plan, and follow up. And so each of these steps has a very discrete set of rules, so to speak, and you can it's flexible within the crisis, but you don't want to mix the rules too much or mix the steps too much. Okay, so the first thing you want to do when you have someone who is in your office or comes up to you and says, "I really need to talk to you," the first thing you need to do is just listen, and this can be the hardest part because if you're anything like like most people in leadership, you want to jump in and fix the problem. And that is way too early of a step. You have to find out what's going on first. So you need to spend some time assessing the situation. Ask lots of questions. What's going on? Who's involved? What have you done already? What kind of things what else is happening that maybe the person doesn't even realize is affecting the situation? Okay, so I am... in my private practice, I'm seeing a teenager who has been suicidal, is currently suicidal, lives with a divorced parent, and had a fairly serious suicide attempt in the spring. And she, the only reason that she's still alive actually is because she texted someone to say goodbye, and that person called 911. Otherwise, she would not be alive. So very serious suicide attempt. She did fine over the summer, but is now once again suicidal, and I started seeing her about a month ago. So as I'm talking to Mom, I was like, okay, well, so, what else is going on? Are there any other factors? And the mom said, really nothing. Everything's just exactly the same. She said, well, I did start seeing a new boyfriend, but she doesn't, that doesn't affect her. But really, that's like a huge thing. Mom just totally didn't understand or get that her relationship is vastly affecting her daughter. And so we've worked a lot on the communication between the two of them. Just recently I had to call Mom to tell her, okay, your daughter is very suicidal again, and we need to have a plan in place. And Mom was kind of like, well, I'm really busy this weekend, and I don't think I can really do that. So, you have to look at those kind of external factors. Okay? So you can't put a plan in place if you don't have willing participants. Okay? So that's the first step. Just listen. During this time, you also want to start forming a family partnership. Okay? So 1 and 2 kind of overlap. First you want to listen, then you want to start forming this relationship with them. So you have, most of you will be working with kid and parents, and so you are going to get them to try to pull you to each side, right? They want you to be the decider. Okay, tell me who's right. They're wrong, I'm right, you need to back me up. Oftentimes it's not the case. You have to remain kind of in a neutral position. You have to affirm both people's positions while at the same time not alienating the other person. And that can be a really hard thing to do. And so doing things like listening very carefully, using a lot of feeling words, okay? Especially during the assessment stage, wow, that must really make you angry, or I can see I would be frustrated in that situation too. Really getting to what they're feeling. And oftentimes when you have someone who is angry, they're not just angry, they're hurt or they're scared. And if you can identify what they're hurt or what they're scared about, that is going to get you a long way. Because if you can say that to them, like, it really sounds like maybe you're scared of this, immediately they're going to be like, oh, someone gets me. Okay? And then you can form a working relationship. But if you have someone in your office, either a kid or a parent, who thinks that you're the enemy, you're not going to get anywhere. They're not going to follow the plan that you're going to set up. They're not going to listen to your advice. So you have to partnership with them before you do anything else. Okay? Let me just look here. I have down be trustworthy. And what I mean by that is if you have information that's given to you in confidence, keep it confidential. So many times, someone will come in and help, and they'll have all this information, but then they'll bring someone else in and they'll say, oh yeah, I met with so-and-so last week, and oh, let me tell you what a mess they are. And of course that gets back to the people. And so even when you're bringing in outside help, make sure the family knows what you're going to tell the other person. So if you're calling in an agency for help, or you're calling in your senior pastor even, make sure that you talk to the family first and say, okay, I'm going to bring so-and-so on board. This is what I was planning on telling them. Is that okay with you? That just helps establish that trusting relationship, because then they know that they have a say in what you're going to tell the other person. Okay? Let me see. I have this under steps to intervention, but it's also important in this stage. Remain calm. You probably all have stories that you could tell me about horrible things that you have heard either kids tell you or parents tell you, because unfortunately that's the world is not a happy place. And so even though internally you might be freaking out about what this person is telling you, you have to remember that it's about them. And so you can freak out later. You have to be the calm, strong person in that situation. And you need to be authoritative, but not authoritarian. So be the person in charge, but don't be the person telling everybody what to do. Okay, that's one way for sure to cut off the connection. Okay? I have down move slowly, and that's kind of what I'm referring to there, that when you are talking to a family, you may already have 6 steps planned out in your head. That's way too fast for them. Take it one step at a time. Be very slow and very methodical about what you're going to tell them and what you're going to do. So, okay. So right now, I know that you have, your family's going through a lot, but this is what I want you to work on right now. Just for today, I want you to make this phone call. Okay? And just have them do that. And then once the phone call is made, you give them the next thing to do. Because when someone is in a crisis, remember, they're not thinking clearly, and so they might forget step B and move on to step C, and step B might be your critical piece. Right? And of course, you always want to take the family to Jesus. If you are with a family and they're in crisis, after they've told their story, hopefully during their story you're praying for them, but after they've had their chance to, you've really had the chance to listen, that's the point where you want to say, before we do anything else, let's go to God with this. Because, one, they need to be heard, and they need to know that you're on their side, but you have to start at the most important spot. So make sure that they know that you're rimming this in prayer. Excuse me. So the next step, after you've heard the story and you've really connected with the family, is to assess resources. And oftentimes this is just simply asking, okay, the last time this happened, what did you do? Okay, did that work? What worked, what didn't work? What are you doing now? Finding out all the things they've tried before and start there. Because you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel every time there's a crisis. And lots of times there's a crisis in a lot, right? Sometimes families just go from one crisis to the next. And so if you can help them to think back to what they did that worked last time, maybe the next time they have a crisis, they'll do that first. Okay, so it's a little bit of training for them as well. Talk to each family member individually. Talk about what they want to see happen, and then what you want to see happen. Okay, so maybe their goal, if you're working with a child and the child says, I just want my parents to stop fighting, or I just want my parents to get back together. That is an important priority for them, but it might not be something you can achieve. And so you have to honor that and listen to the child, but you also have to help them see that that goal might not be able to be met. Okay. As kind of a side note, one of the interesting things I found is no matter how long parents have been divorced, when I talk to kids who have divorced parents, almost always they say, I kind of wish my parents would get back together. Even if they're happy, even if they have great step-parents that they love, there's always this little bit of a dream of, I wish my parents were back together. And so there's always that there. Okay. When you're in the assessment section, I know that sometimes it's hard to find resources. In Hermiston, we don't have any resources. When I worked in Portland or in Salem, it was easy. I would just say, oh, there's this agency, or you could do this, or go here. You can't do that in Hermiston. Even community mental health doesn't exist in Hermiston. We have no county mental health. And so you have to get creative about your resources. This list actually came off of the AG website, which I thought was great. So there are some resources here for you, and I put it on a separate sheet. That way you can file it away. In my office, I have a file folder that is just resources, so that when I'm looking for someone, when I'm looking for an agency to refer someone to, I just pull out that folder and it's all together. So I made it in a handy form so you could file it away separate from the handout. So it's broken down into different sections based on the different categories. So there's one for self-injury, missing children, substance abuse, suicide. There are lots of other great resources, but I wanted to keep it to one page because it's easier for you to wield. There's also some book resources if you want more information on pastoral counseling. So. When you are assessing resources, make sure you know your limits. If you are in over your head, admit it, because if you can't serve the family's needs, it's better to send them on and be a support person than try to solve the problem and fail. Okay? One of the things that I was taught in grad school was always consult. If you feel it all over your head, the first thing you're supposed to do is get on the phone or pull in another person and say, I need to consult with you. I share an office with another psychologist, and we often do this. We'll just say, you got a minute? And run by what's going on, just to get that other person's feedback. Okay? And so there have been people that I see in my private practice that I just tell them, you know what, this is beyond what my practice is. I'm going to send you here instead. Because I would much rather, I would much rather them see someone who that's their specialty than try to fuddle through and make a bigger mess of it. Okay? Excuse me. You want to consider what the role of the church is when you're looking at resources as well. Are there things in your church body or people in your church body who might be able to help in this situation? If you can, use those people. Use those resources first, of course. You also want to make sure that your senior pastor knows what's going on. If there's one thing I know about senior pastors is that they want to know everything that's happening because they're ultimately in charge. And so, responsibility is going to come down to them. So you want to make them aware of anything that you have and consult with them. They may know of resources that you don't even know. The next step, of course, is problem solve. So after you have all the resources, then you start talking about what are we going to do. You're setting up the plan at this point. And it's always good at this stage just to talk. Okay? Just have them give out lots of different options of, what would you like to have happen? And in the perfect world, what would you do? After I see someone in my practice for the first time, I always give them the same homework, no matter how old they are, unless they can't write. Kindergartners don't get this assignment, but everybody else does. I ask them, I say, okay, if I give you a magic wand, and you can magically fix everything in your world, what would you change? And then I have them make me a list, and we come back, and that's what we talk about in the second session. And the reason I do that is because if you just say, how would you fix your life, oftentimes people will say, there's nothing you can do. It's hopeless. But if you tell them it's magic, and they can do whatever they want, there's no limitations. You can live in the biggest house, you can have a 50-foot TV in your room. They'll usually tell you what it really is, what they really want. Okay? And so when you're talking, sometimes taking away the limitations helps you really get at what a possible solution. And they might not see it as a solution, but you might see it as something that you can do. Okay? So, for example, I saw a woman who, on her list, she said, I would love to live at the beach. And I was like, well, why don't you live at the beach? And she said, well, I would have to get a job there. Well, why can't you get a job there? Oh, well, I'd have to sell my house. Well, why can't you sell your house? And she kept coming up with reasons why she couldn't do it. And it turns out she was just scared. She desperately wanted to move and live at the beach, but she couldn't do it because she was scared. She was scared to leave everything she knew. And so that became a huge talking part of our therapy, was getting her past her fear. And she ended up not moving to the beach, but she ended up moving out of Hermiston, so I thought that was a success. I know that sounds horrible, but yeah. But she really didn't like Hermiston, so. During this stage, you want to offer options. Like, have you thought about, what about this? Not, you need to. Never be directive in this stage. Just offer lots of options. Okay? And you want to focus on the here and now, not how are we going to solve this problem, this huge problem? Just focus on the present crisis. You can't fix this family system in, 5 minutes. Okay? Oftentimes these families are in crises because of the way the family system is set up. Maybe dad is an alcoholic, or mom is bipolar, or the child is has been abused and is a drug user, or you're not going to fix that in this crisis. So even though that's part of what's going on, you have to focus on just what this present situation is. And then after the crisis, you can work on the other stuff. Okay? I want to throw in some mandatory reporting here because oftentimes you're going to hear things that are reportable. And as a member of the clergy, you are held by law to report. And nobody likes reporting. It's not pleasant. It feels awful, but mandatory reporting, not only is it your legal responsibility, you can get in trouble if you don't. In the long run, in most cases, it helps the family more than hurts them. Even in situations where kids are taken away, it is beneficial for both parties, the parents and the kids, because the parents will get help if they want help, and the kids will get help, right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what is under the mandatory reporting as far as what issues?
Like what type of abuse?
Yeah, for example, your student comes in, been using illegal drugs. Is that something that is required to report to the police, or is that something like you can work with the family and say, okay, maybe we don't report it this time, try to work with them through that, or...
Right. I'm not an expert on that piece, but this is if a student is using drugs, that is not reportable. If the parent is using drugs, that is reportable. Okay? So if a parent is using drugs in front of the children, okay? And I know that's really hard because, we live in Oregon. Lots of parents use drugs, right? Okay? So, but, it's just because you report it doesn't mean they're going to do anything.
Is there a resource that we can go to so we know what's reportable, what's
Yes. If you go to Oregon Department of Human Services, they have a video up that's mandatory reporting, and it will walk you through it. Okay? But basically, it's any physical abuse, even if there's no mark, even if you don't see any signs of abuse. If a kid says, "My dad hit me last night," legally, you now have to report that. You don't have a choice. Even if you think the kid is lying, you don't have a choice.
Do you have to tell the kid you're reporting?
You don't have to tell the kid. Depending on your relationship with the family, you may want to tell them, but you don't have to tell them. You can make an anonymous report. Okay? The family doesn't have to know who's
You don't have to tell the kid, I need to report this.
You don't have to, but once again, you're going back to relationship and keeping it confidential. You may want to, depending on the situation.
I was going to say, in situations where I've talked with students, I'll tell them before they even open their heart with me, just say, hey, you know what, it's going to stay confidential unless this. That way, I don't know, I guess if they want to filter, they can filter.
Yes.
But if they don't, they tell you, they know that it's going to be out now, they don't feel like you.
Right, that you're springing it on them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and oftentimes when kids tell you that they're being abused, they want you to do something. Right, yes.
And you just call the non-emergency police line?
No, there's a special line, and it's on that DHS website, so, yeah. Are all of you members of the Facebook group, or most of you? Okay, I will put the link on the Facebook group.
Which group?
I'll put on both, because I'm a member of both groups. Oh, the youth leaders and the kids leaders. Yeah. Sorry, I just assumed since it's yeah, so I will put links on both of those for everybody, so. Yeah, so with mandatory reporting, so it's any physical abuse, even something as simple as my mom slapped me is a reportable offense. Okay, any sexual abuse, of course, and any emotional abuse. And emotional abuse is harder not only to report, it's harder for them to document. So, but that includes things like name calling, belittling. It's a very gray area. And so the thing is, if you're not sure if something's reportable, call them. I've done this before. I'll just call and say, hey, I'll identify who I am, and I'll say, I just want to run something by you and see if it's reportable. And they're more than happy to do that. So, I also, as a caveat here, I think out of all the reports that I've made, I think only 2 have been investigated. So, oftentimes, just because you're reporting doesn't mean they're going to investigate. But it gets put in a chart, right? The family gets a little flag, and so if something else happens, they now have 2 things that are going on. Okay? Yeah. My kids are adopted from foster care, and my daughter was 9 when she was removed from her mom's care. And I've talked to her about what she felt that day. And, she not only was removed from her mom's care, her mom left, and she hasn't seen her for 4 years. And so she lost complete contact with her family on that day. But she maintains that that was one of the best things that happened to her, because she knew she was not in a safe situation. And even though she was terrified, she said she knew things were going to get better from that day forward. So remember that even though you might be, you can't imagine, separating a family, it might be the best thing for them. Okay? So, after you've the problem solved, then that's when you start the plan. This is the action stage. Until this point, you're not taking any action. Okay, and you want to have it very discrete, specific steps. Okay, this is what we're going to do first. Okay, next, let's do this. Okay, and you can be directive at this step because you've already gotten all the family's input, and you're not, hopefully, going to be just going off the top of your head. You're going to be incorporating and making a plan from everything that the family has told you. Okay, and everything that maybe you've talked to other people about during this process. So this can include lots of different agencies, lots of different individuals. I always look for resource people outside of the family. Who maybe the kid just needs to spend the night away from the house for a night because the situation in the home is just too tense. So you say, is there some place that, Mary Lou can spend the night tonight just to give everybody a break? Right? And that's true for a kid of any age, right? If you have, a 5-year-old who has, really significant mental health issues and the parents are exhausted, that's setting that family up for physical abuse. And so sometimes just giving each, the kid and the parent a break can really do wonders. A good night's sleep can do more sometimes than we think it can. You need a timeline, but you also need dates or times. Like, okay, I need you to, let's do this, and I'm gonna check in and follow up with you tomorrow, and and make sure that you've got that taken care of. Okay, and so that you also plan a time to meet again to make sure that follow through is happening. Okay, like let's today's Tuesday. Let's go out for lunch on Thursday and see how things are going, and we'll check in and make sure that you're doing okay. Right? And then after the crisis is over, that's when the follow-up happens. So you can meet lots of times during the crisis, but after the crisis is resolved, you want to continue to check in with the family for a while. You might not be meeting because, of course, as the crisis gets better, you want to kind of wean yourself away so that the family can be independent. But at the same time, you want to make sure that they know that you're still there and that you're still a resource for them. Okay? And in that meeting, you want to talk about, how did this work? What went well? What didn't work well? What can we do next time to make sure that if this situation comes up or a situation like this comes up, how are we going to make it different next time? And so that you can do that yourself, but you also include the family, get the family's perspective. So, how did I do and how did the family do? I have some just little notes at the bottom. So lasting change can only come through God. I'm sure you all have seen this. You have families who are on the roller coaster of crisis, and they just go up and down all the time. And you could be the best, family's pastor in the world. Give them all the resources, all the tools, all the, everything. But only God can really change that situation in that family. And so you have to just keep bringing it back to God. In my role as a psychologist, a lot of my clients know that I'm a Christian. A lot of them know that I'm a pastor's wife, but not all of them know that, and not all of them would be comfortable with that. I don't advertise myself as a Christian psychologist, just as a psychologist. But what I find is that there are times in session that I am praying hard because I need that direction, so I know that person needs the direction. So. We already talked about that people are not often logical. You set the tone. So remember, how you are acting is going to set the tone for the meeting. If you are very aggressive, the family's going to act in like. So make sure that you are staying calm in that. Crisis is very short term. We talked about that you want to wean them off slowly. Model appropriate behavior. As the family is interacting, there is going to be lots of inappropriate behavior happening, right? Parents are going to say things to kids that you are like, whoa, okay? Interrupt that. Don't let that kind of behavior happen in front of you. But don't then treat the parents the way that they just treated the child. So show them how to intervene appropriately, right? Yeah, exactly. How often do we do that, though? Stop it! Okay. Use humor. Okay. Humor is always a good diffuser. Even a family in the midst of grief is going to laugh at something. Okay. The most depressed, suicidal kid sitting on my couch will still laugh. Right? You have to find the humor in situations, and it's a resiliency factor. Right? And then finally, mourn and rejoice with the family. When families are going through losses, they're mourning and they're sad, and feel that with them. Tell them, I'm really, I'm heartbroken for you. But then when things go well, rejoice with them. Really build up. If the child, if you're working with a kid and they are having a rough time at school and they have a great day, really praise them for that. Make a big deal about that. So I thought we would use the last little bit of time just for questions, things that maybe I can help with or answer.
I know myself, and I'm not going to read all these books. Is there one or two that you've read that you're on this list that, yeah, this is a really good one? Make sure you put this one on your blog.
The very first one on the list by Norman Wright is a great book. That's probably if you're just buying one book, buy that one. Anything by Norman Wright is a good book. Let me think. The Joe Hittner book is probably a good book for kids as well. There aren't a lot of books just on crisis. So there's lots of good books that might help, though, like the Boundaries book. That is a great book. I always recommend everybody read that book, especially if you're in the ministry, because people will step all over your boundaries. And so if you can learn how to set appropriate boundaries, you're going to be able to teach that to families. So, and that is by Thompson and Cloud.
There was one copy on the free resource table.
Oh, there you go. So, yeah.
What do you suggest, as far as city and knowing, if it's a crisis comes and we're not, able to help, we need to refer to, a counselor or psychologist, but we don't really know who's good, who would have, some of the views, that we would want. Do you suggest, calling around and asking those things, or checking with other, what would you suggest?
I would start by asking people, your senior pastor might know more of people in your area, so I would start there. But chances are if you start asking around, people will say, oh, I know this person, they're really good, and then just start making a list. So, yeah.
Can I say, Focus on the Family, I think, has a pretty extensive list of different Christian counselors and psychiatrists and that sort of thing.
Yeah, there also is a Christian Christian Counseling Association, I think is what it's called, and they have a referral list as well. And they have a Newburgh chapter because of the college, George Fox, and so you can look that way too. So the problem with those kind of sites is that you just have to pay money to get on their site. So you can go there, but also I would always ask for personal references. So, okay. Other questions or? Okay. Another resource that I just thought of, which is kind of what partially what I based the steps on, something called emotion coaching, and it works really well with when you're working one-on-one with people. And it is by John Gottman, who actually is a marriage therapist, but he wrote a book about raising your child's intelligent or your emotional quotient. And with Gottman, he says that the way that you, when you have a child or an adult, because it works with adults too, who is distressed, the first thing you want to do is just listen to them. You know, your child is, going on and on about, they're being naughty, they're not listening to you, and, just really listen and empathize with them. Okay, that's where the empathy piece again. So, I working with I work a lot with middle school girls, and if you've ever worked with middle school girls, you know that they're like this emotionally, right? So I might have a girl in front of me who is just totally out of line, being inappropriate, talking about things. So I might just say, "What is going on with you today?" And say, "Nothing. Well, you seem really angry today. Is there something happening?" And then if she starts talking, right, that's when you say, "Oh yeah, I would really be angry too." Then the third, after you've listened and empathized, then you set limits. Okay, you know what? I totally get why you feel that way, but you can't disrupt the class. It's rude. You're upsetting the other students. No one else is enjoying the class because of your behavior. Right? So you empathize with them, but you say this is not appropriate. And then the third thing is you throw it back to them. So what do you think you should do? What are we going to do? What would you like to do? Anything like that, so that they solve their problem, you're not solving it for them. And kids, even little kids, are super creative when it comes to this stuff. When I'm sitting down with parents and making behavior plans, I always ask the kids, what do you think are appropriate punishments and what do you think are appropriate rewards? The kids are way more creative than their parents are. The kids are like, well, if I don't do that, I think I should have to go pick up the dog poop, or I need to, and I'm like, your parent would never think of that, right? They would never think of giving you that chore, So I write it down, and then I bring the parent in and say, well, this is what they think they need to be punished with. And the parent is always like, seriously? I would love to do that. So it's usually by the time they're in my office, they're really, the parents are really just frustrated. They just want their kid fixed. So, and then the last step is to kind of wrap it all up, kind of do the assessment, okay, so now we're going to do that, right? And when you are listening to a kid who's upset, when you throw that emotion in, oftentimes it just brings them right down because they feel heard. And if you can make them feel heard, you will get them to calm down. When people don't think you're hearing them, they repeat themselves a lot. So if they keep saying something, just say, stop, let me make sure I understand you, and repeat back, did I get it right? Have that reflective listening, and then they'll tell you the piece you're missing, and then they'll go on to something else.
Thank you for listening to the 2012 Fusion Podcast. For more information on the Oregon Ministry Network and our events, please visit our website at oregonag.org.